Rational Wiki is a whack site long run by teenage liberals who follow queer theory, an ideology that supports prostitution and paedophilia because of its obsession with breaking taboos. The Feministwiki, newly established, is for feminism unmodified. End quote. Well, if that isn't a spicy take, considering it comes from a cis man who is also a self-declared child molester, then I don't know what is. So the time has come to discuss how conservative Christianity and fascism has appropriated the word feminism as a means of attacking the LGBT+ community, specifically in relation to trans folk. Now this is important to cover since there are segments of both the feminist and secular communities who are holding the door open for said people. They don't seem to realise that there's going to be a cost for all of us down the line. That is, unless we come together and stand in opposition to said bigotry. So this video is for the people who think the current discussion on trans rights doesn't really impact either secularism or feminism, because as I'm about to show you, it really does. Not only is what is happening hurting trans people, it's extending the power of the church and defining women by nothing outside their ability to give birth, both of which are an issue worth discussing in an open fashion. Now at the forefront of a lot of what is happening is a group known as the Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF for short. They're an international group which targets trans people who are attempting to gain and secure their human and civil rights. Utilising various methods, they not only seek to stop advances on those fronts, but to strip back what has already been painstakingly gained over the past few years. So right off the bat, one of the things to note about WOLF is the imagery they use. Go to the group's website, its Twitter page, its Facebook, and to a lesser extent its YouTube channel, and a common theme becomes apparent. You'll see black and white photos of what could be considered old school feminism. In a similar vein to Feministwiki's Feminism Unmodified, their imagery seems to be designed to create the idea that there's some sort of feminist orthodoxy adhering to long abandoned tenets of feminism, which is interesting since said group has no presence prior to 2014, when it emerged as a response to growing discourse surrounding trans people. Prior to that, the organisers of the site seem to have very little interest, certainly much less than they do now, in speaking on the subject of women's rights. And I feel it's important to point out the imagery at play here and what it seems designed to convey, so that we may be less vulnerable to said methods. Sure, transphobia is nothing new, but neither is support for trans people. Meanwhile, this organisation and others like it seem to be attempting to feed on this idea that there's some sort of extension of mainstream classical feminism, feminism responsible for the gains women have made thus far. But the truth is, this image is entirely fabricated. It does not bear true. Much like the minimal lip service they pay to various issues faced by cis women. Whilst they tweet about things such as birth control, parental leave, and rape, beyond that they don't do much, and it's not for a lack of resources. WOLF was very happy to file a lawsuit against the United States government for introducing policies seeking to protect trans children from physical, verbal, and sexual assault. So, what could be the source of this discrepancy? It's almost as if they aren't all that interested in women's rights at all, merely the aesthetic of it as a means to attack trans people whilst shielding themselves from criticism, something which is supported by the evidence. Take for example the fact that WOLF board member Kara Dansky, she received a donation of $15,000 from the Alliance Defending Freedom. For clarification, a report put together by the Southern Poverty Law Center describes that organization as, quote, founded by some 30 leaders of the Christian right, the Alliance Defending Freedom is a legal advocacy and training group that has supported the recriminalization of homosexuality in the US and criminalization abroad, has defended state-sanctioned sterilization of trans people abroad, has linked homosexuality to pedophilia, and claims that a homosexual agenda will destroy Christianity and society. ADF also works to develop religious liberty legislation and case law that would allow the denial of goods and services to LGBT+ people on the basis of religion. Since the election of President Donald Trump, the ADF has become one of the most influential groups informing the administration's attack on LGBT+ rights, working with an ally in Attorney General Jeff Sessions. End quote. And the subject of reproductive rights is also mentioned in quote. Using its international platforms, the ADF works with policymakers and other organizations to outlaw abortion, deny equality of marriage to LGBT+ people worldwide, and continue to push for a hard-right Christian theocratic worldview that is reflected in legislation and policies. End quote. Wolf has also received financial support from Imperial Independent Media. This is an organization that sued a research clinic in Washington, not out of hopes of stopping the research carried out there, but in hopes of gaining the names and addresses of the involved researchers. Now, why do they do this? Well, the clinic utilized fetal tissue samples, so they had the intention of publishing said private details of the researchers involved in hopes that stochastic terrorism would claim further victims. If you don't know what stochastic terrorism is, it refers to the use of public discourse to radicalize individuals and incite them to violence in a fashion that seems almost random. If you've ever heard of so-called lone wolf terrorism, you've most likely heard this in practice. That's why so many so-called lone wolves all share the same interests, the same backgrounds, follow the same people, share the same political ideologies, etc. Because it's not random, it's cultivated. Those open to being radicalized are filtered out by gradually worsening rhetoric until they reach a point where they hear some conspiracy podcaster saying something about they're killing babies and decide to act on it. And groups like those that fund Wolf have a large role in that. But it's not a case of simply taking money from these organizations. Wolf has actively worked alongside them in multiple instances. In 2017, Wolf filed a joint lawsuit against trans teenager Gavin Grimm. Their ally? The Family Policy Alliance, an organization that asks you to, quote, join with Family Policy Alliance so pro-life, pro-family, pro-freedom Americans make their voices heard for preborn babies and school children. End quote. Then we come to Wolf's involvement with the Heritage Foundation, specifically their Biology Isn't Bigotry talk, in which active Wolf member Mary Lou Singleton took part in said panel, offering credence to the narratives surrounding trans people that have been constructed by the Christian right these past few years. Narratives of the dangers trans people pose society, in particular, young girls and vulnerable women. And it's not like they hide the fact that these are constructed narratives particularly well. LifeSite News hosted an article written by Mass Resistance, a conservative group from Massachusetts which fought against trans-inclusive bathroom policy. Inside that article, they say the following, quote, now with the transgender anti-discrimination bills, the same thing is happening. Our side concocted the bathroom safety, male predator argument as a way to avoid an uncomfortable battle over LGBT+ ideology and still fire up people's emotions. It worked in Houston a few years ago. End quote. And this follows on directly from mention of a similar tactic used against same-gender parents at an earlier point in America's history. So considering this, is it that surprising that said organizations refuse to make a stand for the rights of bisexual and lesbian women? That it refuses to fight for reproductive care and abortion access, which, outside of trans men and some non-binary folk, disproportionately impacts women? Not really. What we have here is something known as AstroTERFing, a term that describes the idea of creating a movement which has the outwardly appearance of being grassroots, being self-formed by the people impacted by a certain issue. The reality, meanwhile, is that said movement is artificial. Wolf is presented as a figurehead that speaks for the well-being of women, when the truth is it's funded and backed by the Christian right to the very opposite effect. Now, there are several reasons to do this. One is a very well-known divide and conquer strategy. The LGBT+ community fractured is weaker than the LGBT+ community united. The Southern Poverty Law Center carried out an investigation into said right-wing groups and found a desire to utilize fringe lesbians as a means to separate lesbians as a whole from the rest of the LGBT+ movement. But there's also the fact that conservatives see anti-trans bills as a way to limit reproductive freedoms of cis women. Back in January, Utah passed a bill which defined women strictly by their reproductive capacity. And whilst this was presented as an anti-trans bill, its true debts are a little more nefarious. You see, if women are strictly defined by their reproductive capacity, that frames said reproduction as almost this inevitable trait inherent to a woman. This framing can then be used in discussion on reproductive healthcare and abortion access to argue that pregnancy is almost this predestined or divine occurrence, one a person has no right to hold. It's a sneaky way to use a wedge issue to control the language in abortion debate. It offers the anti-choice crowd a sense of legitimacy that they lack. and it's defended by self-proclaimed feminists who don't care about the impact this has on cis women, trans men, and non-binary folk. They seem more preoccupied with how this hurts the trans community than the impact it has on those people. And this is something I've witnessed here in the UK as well. Self-declared Dr. Venice Allen, known by her online persona Dr. Radfem, is a particularly spiteful individual who shows many of the features discussed already. While she forms herself as old-school feminism, unflinching in a changing society, her actions speak very differently. Of particular interest is a certain photo published to her Twitter. In said photo, Venice stands next to Tory MP David Davies, thanking him for, quote, standing up for lesbians. Now, why is this picture of interest? Well, it's of interest because David Davies voted against legalizing same-gender marriage at every vote on the matter he attended. So here we have an apparent radical feminist thanking a Tory MP who voted against lesbian rights for somehow standing up for lesbians. Why? Well, because David Davies spoke out against the rights of trans people, specifically in response to proposed changes to the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, changes which would make legally changing one's birth certificate less of a bureaucratic nightmare. Note, the proposed changes would not affect such things as passports and bathroom access, which trans people already had in the UK, making much of the fear tactics imported from the US a distraction. Venice Allen is also well known for a habit of attacking cis women she deems too masculine, hurling transphobic slurs at them, only to claim it's their fault for not putting more time into adhering to patriarchal standards of beauty. So there's that to consider when she forms herself as a feminist. One of her pals is another British woman, Kelly J. Keane Minshall, commonly known as Posy Parker, a woman who decries the evil of transgender people, whilst posing with Holocaust-denying Trump supporters such as Hans Johansson. Fact is, even some of the TERFs find themselves unable to deal with the far-right cozying that takes place. At the start of this year, one of said people, Jean Hatchett, broke off from the likes of Wolf and Keane Minshall, but not before writing a post explaining her issues. Amongst them are some of the things I've already discussed, but there was more. For example, Hatchett took issue with Keane Minshall's friendship with Stephen Yexie Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson. Yexie Lennon famously jeopardized court cases surrounding child grooming gangs to line his own pockets. He breached court orders designed to protect the British judicial system and risked having the cases thrown out or started again as a new jury was found, all to fuel his xenophobic narratives at the cost of the victims of said grooming gangs. Keane Minshall praised his actions whilst dismissing the work of feminists, such as myself, who cover the topic without resorting to xenophobia. So it's not a case of Keane Minshall once spoke to a room full of Nazis. This is a repeated occurrence by self-declared feminists, hardly surprising when one realises that said feminism is appropriated. And that's part of the reason why Irish feminists opened fire at these appropriators at the start of 2018. They went after the fact that whilst groups like Women's Place UK and We Need to Talk assist the Christian right and fascist groups in harming trans people, women in Northern Ireland lacked access to safe and legal abortions, echoing very clearly the sort of selective concern for women's well-being that we saw in the States. To them, feminism is just a mask. It's a way for them to retain their abhorrent views about trans people whilst being able to denounce any form of criticism as sexism. What they fail to realise or simply don't care about is the fact that conservative Christians and fascists have used them to adopt the very same mask to forward their anti-reproductive health and xenophobic goals. Which brings us back round to where we started, Feministwiki. Now you'd be fair in asking what Feministwiki has to do with any of the discussion up to now. Well, if you go to its main page, the very first group it lists as one it stands in solidarity with is the far-right funded Women's Liberation Front. It also goes on to list Women's Place UK, the organisation that refuses to support abortion access in Ireland but expects Irish feminists to buy into their bigotry. This is a conservative Christian and far-right infection which permeates throughout these pro-feminist organisations. And there are people who buy into their narratives due to their own ignorance of trans people, not realising that all they're actually doing is helping certain groups position themselves to strip away the rights of all women, both cis and trans. And it's something they need to wake up to. It's also something we need to wake up to in the secular community. Because much in the same way that groups such as Wolf have given the far-right voices a means of attack, so too have certain voices in the secular community. We have people who others look up to parroting the likes of Ben Shapiro on trans people. Unironically, we have them using the same alarmist rhetoric to claim that trans people are a threat to cis women, that they're going to destroy their hard-earned rights by obtaining and securing their own rights. And we have atheists asserting the same old tired Christianity is responsible for all that is great in Western civilization because of this. What this is a complete abandonment of secular humanist values. Just like the Christian right and fascists are all too happy to adopt the appearance of fighting for women's rights to harm trans people, they're ecstatic at the opportunity to don the veneer of reasoning without the substance. So we need to put an end to that. We need to arm ourselves with the knowledge to deal with this creeping religion and fascism. It's poisoning both the feminist and secular communities. But what do you lot think? Is this encroachment on both the secular and feminist communities by the Christian right something we can just ignore? Is abandoning reproductive rights acceptable as a means to hurt the trans community? Why is it that so few people know about said AstroTERFing, and what can we do to change that? Did I miss something you lot noticed? If so, be sure to leave us a comment down below. Now, I'd just like to give a special shout out to Casey Explosion. Whilst I'm able to read through peer-reviewed journal articles, no problem, there's just too much going on surrounding the trans community for me to review every single news piece published on the matter. And Casey has been amazing in that regard. She routinely puts out threads covering topics such as the one discussed today, and my life would have been a hell of a lot harder without her. Not just for this video, but for many of my previous videos. And Casey, I know you like to downplay what you're doing as just compiling a lot of what others have written, but I think you are truly underestimating the importance of what you do. You've enlightened many people on complex subjects, and that's admirable. As always, please check out our other videos. You can also support Essence of Thought by Patreon, and in doing so help us reach our goal of becoming ad-free. We'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who's already given to the channel, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, Brad R, McGay, John Schoenrock, Daniel Martinez, Zach Braxton, Ewan Heinberg, Alexander Williams, Atlas5, and Doyle Jackson. Take care now, and we'll see you next time.